Well, Pat, they said 6 seasons and a movie for Community, but here we are for our premiere of season 3 of our Game of Thrones recap show, Talkin Thrones. Man, season 3, dude. I mean, what was it you said? It's basically, this is all the season has going for it, is the Red Wedding. And I'll give it that. But I also think there's still a lot to love about season 3 as well. Like, what, you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I don't know, Dom. It's man, not really. It's oh man, I'm caught off guard. I had some audio issue going on, but I think the Talking TV audience will agree with me in terms of the name of this episode. It's another foreign language title. It's like
you do so well with those.
Yeah, but what does it mean? Like I guess I didn't do my homework.
So you know what's funny? I didn't do my homework here either because I keep researching. I know Valar Morghulis is all men must die, but Valar Dohaeris has something to do with like and those shall serve or something like that. I got to do my research on that. But all of that and more. Stay tuned. All right, Pat, we're here with season 3 of Talkin Thrones. Season 3 is an interesting beast. I'm not gonna lie, like, cause it's one of those seasons where like very similar to season 1. I noticed this trend right with the odd seasons versus the even season, at least for these first couple ones, where the odd seasons again very set up, very long form, very drawn out, a lot of really interesting character moments that usually end with some sort of an explosive climax. And then the even seasons, it typically tend to be like more fast-paced, more action-based. There's usually a lot happening in each episode. I don't know. What's your take on that?
Overall, I think what we're going to expect in this season is, I have to agree with you, that slow burn. We're going to...
Oh, man, I know you've missed that so much.
It's one of those things where we have to finish the War of the Kingdoms, right? The civil war that's going on. And, I think the way that the first 2 seasons have gone, it basically didn't give us any direction in terms of like how long this war is going to last. Like I think it was Melisandre that was like, hey, thousands of people are going to die. This war is going to continue. It's going to go on forever. And, the one thing I will say, we obviously have only watched episode 1 and we're recapping that here today. But what I remember about season 3 is that war does seem to drag on forever.
It drags. Let's put it this way. Like if season 2 was like the fast pace, okay, things are happening. Like this person making this move. Oh, this person making this move. Oh no, this unexpected thing came out of nowhere. Oh no, like we got the wildfire. We got the battle of Blackwater Bay. All this crazy shit is happening. This is like kind of like the after effects of it. This is where it's like, okay, all the action is happening. Now all of the characters are kind of having to regroup, kind of having to get back together, and kind of having to like really suffer the consequences of their actions. And oh man, is season 3 a season of characters suffering for their consequences? This is famously the season, besides the Red Wedding, which everyone knows about. This is the season with Theon's extended torture sequence. Arya learning hard truths with the Brotherhood Without Banners. Tyrion having to suffer in King's Landing under the yoke of Tywin, now that Tywin is back in command. Sansa, who finally got out from having to marry Joffrey, now has to contend with potentially being his plaything and everything that has to happen with her. Robb, obviously, suffering the consequences of his actions, which, again, everyone told him was going to happen. But, and like this is a season where the characters really have to suffer for the actions. Even Jaime, to an extent, who, Jaime and Brienne have this journey that takes them throughout all of the Riverlands, and and Jaime, ultimately, we learn a lot about him and learn that Jaime kind of is suffering in his own way each and every single day,
Yeah, listen, I think this season basically starts the, let's talk about the Lannisters for a second. Like they're sort of like consolidated their power in King's Landing. Yes. There's no longer a threat there. And now it's looking outward. Like they're united. They've dealt with, basically they've reinforced their armies. And now it's like, let's focus on the last remaining obstacle, which is Robb Stark. And, it's still a big threat, and it's still like the North versus the South. And, I think it's just a lot of waiting for the shoe to drop, so to speak, throughout this entire season.
Yeah, big part of this season as well, in addition to that, obviously, is I think that this season in particular, more so than the last season, like last season again, and each of these first 4 seasons, I should say, are continuing to hint and hype up the overriding existential threat of the White Walkers that are slowly pending. But I think this season does a particularly good job of continuing to reinforce that threat. We spend a lot of time north of the Wall getting to know the other cultures of people that live up there. I think this is the season where we spend, if I'm not mistaken, we spend the least amount of time with the Night's Watch just in general. I'm pretty sure this season in particular, because even season 7, I think it's this season and season 7 where we spend the least amount of time with them. Season 8, we have that weird moment because everything's truly consolidated at Winterfell. But we barely get any of the Night's Watch this season. But I guess that's why we should talk about it, right now.
I think we get enough,
just the right amount.
Opening scene here.
You want to talk about a solidifying opening scene? This, and I forgot that this was a cold open too. This was the first season where this is the cold open before the credits roll, and we have Sam running through the snow. We only hear it. I think that this is probably the only instance where Game of Thrones gets away with not showing the action, and we only hear it off screen, where you hear the screams in the background of the White Walkers, the Whites attacking, the Night's Watch screaming as they're slowly being murdered, Sam running through the snow. He sees one of the brothers with their head, quite literally holding their heads in the hand. Man, the White Watchers really, they definitely took a couple of cues from Michael Myers there, just as far as the decorative nature that they do whenever they decapitate their victims. And he's almost killed by another White. Ghost runs up, tackles the White. The Lord Commander burns it. You see all the rest of the Night's Watch members. I definitely will say, I'm still a little skeptical about how any of them survived. But the Lord Commander, he kind of reminds Sam, he's like, did you send the ravens? And unlike the book, Sam did not send the ravens. But he had a pretty good excuse. He was kind of trapped at the bottom of the mountain. He was trying to, find his way through the White Walkers. He kind of couldn't see where he was going. He couldn't find the camp. I don't know. I feel like he's being a little hard on them.
It's kind of amazing, that Sam survived this, right? Because the end of last season, he's staring down a White Walker, and then now he's running in a fog and doesn't know where he is. The headless, Night's Watchman that he finds and stumbles upon. And he almost gets killed until basically Jon's wolf saves him, and Mormont comes in and puts the final death blows onto the dead.
At this point, Ghost may as well just be a member of the Night's Watch at this point. I love how Ghost was with Jon last season, then he kind of just disappeared, and now he just comes back and literally out of nowhere to save Sam in the nick of time. Oh man, it's good to see the role that the direwolves are playing going here on out. But obviously the Lord Commander turns around, has this big grandiose speech saying, kind of the first of a couple times that we hear this, where it's we got to get south of the Wall and warn everyone, or else by the time we get to summer, everyone is going to be that thing pointing to the White that he just burned. Roll credits, and man, if there was ever if there was ever any doubt, any hesitation as to whether this show was going to be able to pick up after Blackwater, this is it right there. This show still had legs. It shows this show still has a lot going for it.
It starts season 3 off with a bang. It's very suspenseful. It reinforces, like you said, the White Walkers are here. They're going to stay. They're actually going to be a bigger threat.
They're actually going to be a much bigger threat.
Yeah, as the show continues. And listen, season 3 with the the Night's Watch is going to be the return to Craster's, and a lot of stuff is going to take place.
A lot of stuff happens there.
And it's really going to change the makeup of what's going on beyond the Wall.
Indeed.
Throughout the rest of the series.
Indeed. Speaking of which, as far as what's going on north of the Wall, Jon and the beginning of the continuation of his journey with the wildlings, Jon, Ygritte in their camp, they arrive at the wildling camp, and Jon is just kind of flustered. He's surprised by their organization.
He's kneeling down to anybody that seems to have authority. He's just like, my lord.
My lord. And Tormund. Or also an introduction to a couple. We get introduced to a lot of characters in this episode, but obviously, once he reaches the 10, he sees the giant for the first time, and Ygritte kind of tells him
exactly.
Don't sit there too long, because when giants start to feel threatened, they get pissed off, and then she kind of tells him, I once saw a giant pound a man into the ground, and obviously, subtle foreshadowing for what's going to come, and I just love the look the giant gives him. But she takes him to the main tent. I love how kids are just coming out and just chucking fucking rocks at him, and then he's like, oh, she's like, you're wearing the wrong cloak. He's like, and of course she's like, they don't have, this lot's disrespectful. They don't have fathers to kind of show them what's what. And he's like, well, what happened to them? And she's like, well, they were killed by your lot. And then he's like, oh, okay, that makes sense. And they go inside the tent. He sees we're introduced to Tormund Giantsbane here. This is our introduction to him. Obviously, famously, big, froofy, red-haired wildling.
Exactly, and that's who Jon, confuses as Mance, because obviously he is a big sort of stocky character. And he's also the first one to speak to him,
of course.
But Mance kind of comes out of the shadows after,
literally out of the shadows. He's a little bit of a shadow leader here.
Yeah, and says no one kneels beyond the wall. Stand up and all that type of stuff. So this is the introduction to Mance, and how he's a capable leader. And I think the most important thing that's said here is Jon, to convince them that he's on their side, is I really want to fight for the living.
Yes.
And, that's something that I think resonates with Mance and hopefully remains true, for Jon going forward.
Couple takeaways from this season. I know, like I said, because I don't want to take away from this one, because there's a lot to talk about. There's not as many location hopping in this episode as much, but there's a lot that happens in these storylines. So a couple takeaways that I have here. One, obviously the introduction to Mance Rayder, kind of how he handles his conduct, right? He comes out of the shadows. He prefers to operate behind the scenes. He kind of lets the scene with Jon thinking Tormund is him ride out a little bit. It kind of tells you a lot about him and about kind of how he handles himself, and the reason why he is the first person to have been able to bring all of these different wildling tribes together for the first time in 1,000 years. It makes sense.
Yeah, he's a careful person. He's thinking about the logistics. It's perception is a big thing. He is basically a leader, and that's one of the things. This show loves to show what leadership capabilities are. That's why Mormont is the head of the Night's Watch, and we see him sort of leading and trying to teach Jon how to lead. And now Mance, he knows how to lead, and through his actions, he's ultimately going to also teach Jon about leadership.
Indeed, Jon learns a lot from Mance as far as leadership goes. And again, Karen Hines' portrayal here, unbelievable, just unbelievable. He's in four episodes in this entire goddamn show, and it's one of the most memorable performances for me on this entire show. I really do love the character of Mance Rayder. Again, he shows it. The other thing that is immediately apparent too is that he is not a wildling. He is not a wildling. I believe he was, if I'm remembering correctly, he was born north of the wall, but he became. I think that he lived south of the wall for some time before he became a member of the Night's Watch, but he kind of always had that wildling blood in him. But I think that's another reason why he feels such a kinship towards Jon as they go throughout the rest of the show, because he constantly does feel that push-pull, right? He has the urge to be free and everything, but he also does have a sense of kind of orderliness and a sense of, let's call it discipline, that I feel like is missing from a lot of the wildlings. And it's all immediately established here. And I love the moment too, because again, it doesn't happen exactly this way in the books, but the big takeaway here is the fact, and as to how Jon is able to fool Mance, is the fact that he's able to say, Lord Commander Mormont knows what the threat is, and yet he still did nothing about it when he could have. If you guys are going to are supposedly the ones that are going to be fighting against the White Walkers, and I want to be against them. Now that he's actually, now that Jon has seen them for himself, and now that he knows kind of what they're up against just in general, and now understands the threat in a way that he didn't before. It's going to be an interesting journey, to say the least. Again, Jon doesn't get that much face-to-face time with Mance, but the things that he does, again, I repeat it, four episodes entirely that Mance is in. He's in this episode. He's in episode 3 of this season, that we don't see him again until the finale of season 4, when Jon goes to negotiate with him north of the wall, and then the first episode of season 5 where he dies. That's it. Those are the only 4 episodes that Mance is in, and the fact that he makes that much of an impact throughout the show is impressive, to say the least. So now we move south to King's Landing, and again, everything is always happening in King's Landing. It is the centerpiece of this show. It is constantly trying to not be burned down and burned to a crisp. And obviously that doesn't happen.
Tom, looking at the notes here, you seem obsessed with Bronn's.
It focuses a lot on Bronn. It's the opening scene. It kind of shows, he's trying to get some reward. He's trying to get some just desserts for the battle. He's been made a knight. He's taking advantage of his new kind of up jump position. And
he's in Lord Baelish's establishment.
Yes,
presumably. There's
presumably. I mean, he kind of
other establishments.
Why would we be in another establishment at this point?
Yeah, I know. Lord Baelish is the king, so to speak,
essentially of this domain. Yeah, and of course Bronn comes in at the worst possible time.
Exactly. This is a comedic scene. It's definitely meant to show you who Bronn is, the type of person he is. But also, Tyrion needs some help and requests his services. And unfortunately, the message comes at the worst possible time. Bronn is basically already paid up, so to speak.
Yep. Yeah, Bronn's good. Bronn's having his. And this is kind of again, it's not quite established until like next season, kind of the beginning of Bronn's ascension with Tyrion. Not that they really have any, but like it definitely like is established in like a couple of comedic scenes here. It's like, yeah, Bronn has moved up in the world. Bronn is now in a position where he doesn't necessarily need Tyrion. And even though a lot of the scenes are kind of made for laughs, it's continuing to suggest that Tyrion's position, continuing to reinforce that Tyrion's position is not nearly as stable as it was last season. You know, Tyrion takes a little bit of a backseat. The focus of this season mostly goes towards Jon and Daenerys, much more so than in the last season, and kind of how they're building themselves up respectively. And as far as, and also Tyrion is no longer the centerpiece of the storytelling in King's Landing. You know, you got the Tyrells there now. Tywin's back in King's Landing. There's a lot of stuff that happens.
But I will say that Bronn has like some of the best scenes in this episode because, you know, first of all, he gets the message. He goes to Tyrion's chamber, but you know, he's beat by Cersei. Cersei has a private meeting with
great scene, by the
Tyrion.
way. Awesome scene.
And, you know, outside the chamber, Bronn's like, hey, I'm here to, you know, talk to Tyrion. And he has a little bit of a skirmish with Cersei's guards, and it's about to turn violent and bloody, but obviously it's sort of at the last second sort of diffuses.
Second time, by the way, I'd like to say the second time in the 2 episodes, because it almost happened 2 episodes earlier with his encounter with the Hound right before the Battle of Blackwater.
Yeah, so basically, you know, it is dangerous for Tyrion. Still, you know, Cersei is telling him straight to his face that you're not really a threat. The conversation they have is about Tyrion's request to speak to Tywin.
Yes.
And
it's very interesting because, again, even though Cersei never directly says anything, Tyrion can immediately tell she is extremely nervous and frightened about what she might about what he might tell Tywin. And that's kind of like, I feel like much more so the reason. Like she goes to his room and we're immediately suspicious. We're like, because we're in our heads, we're thinking kind of, oh no, you know, Cersei's here to kind of finish the job, you know, kind of ensure it. But the scene goes a lot differently than both us and Tyrion are expecting, because Tyrion immediately.
Well, I think it's a really good character moment for Cersei, because it's like Tyrion's like, oh, you know, I just want to speak to my father. What do you mean? What do I want? And it's Cersei basically says, hey, I don't want you going in there and slandering me.
Right.
And Tyrion brings up this whole story about how she had a servant whipped for like no reason at all. And basically like it wasn't slander, you know, and it's just
not
like
at
Cersei, it clearly points towards how vindictive Cersei is. You know, in terms of what she's willing to do to get what she wants.
Right.
And so she wanted to punish that particular servant back when she was a kid. And in this case, you know, she definitely wants to punish Tyrion. But she doesn't want him to actually like tell the truth and, you know, put her in the bad side of Tywin.
If there's one thing we've learned about Cersei, it's that the truth never benefits her, ever. That's why she's constantly in a world of her own lies. But yeah, the other thing that this episode immediately establishes is that now that Tywin is back in King's Landing, like, it is official once again where the power truly is in the Lannister family. You know, last season things were in kind of a makeshift position. Tywin was trying to balance out like the Lannisters' weakening foothold in King's Landing with kind of battling with Robb in the Riverland, so it kind of wasn't his position wasn't as secure as he would have liked. That's why he kind of had no choice but to send Tyrion. But now that he's back and things are kind of back in his command, now that they've thrown off Stannis, now that things have calmed down a little bit, and now that they really only have you know, Robb in the Riverlands and then Balon in the north and you know, and the Greyjoys to deal with, you know, things have definitely started to look up for him a bit. And so it's kind of reinforced here once again that it's like Cersei is not in control, Joffrey is not in control, Tywin, you know, Tyrion is no longer in control. Well, Tywin is the one in control.
And you know, Tywin, this kind of starts his characterization of being disappointed in his children. You know, it's like specifically Tyrion.
It establishes, I find, Tywin's fatal flaw, which is the fact that Tywin, for all of his might and all of his sheer force, you know, that he rules through, Tywin is still a man of principle. And the problem that he consistently finds with his children is that because he is a man of principle and because he is a man who sees the bigger picture in ways that his children do not, you know, say what you will, but all 3 Lannister children, with the exception of Tyrion for the most part, but this again is where it was what creates the divide between Tyrion and Tywin, is the fact that Jaime and Cersei are for the most part pretty self-centered as far as that goes. Jaime only cares about himself and his glory and making himself look good. At least so we think. And Cersei is only concerned with constructing this fortress and making sure that herself and her children are safe and not caring about the whims and the wishes of anybody else in the 7 Kingdoms. And it creates this big divide because Tywin at the very least understands that at the end of the day, they need the peasants to, you know, be on their side and to understand and have faith in them, because if they don't, that's what leads to moments like the riot in last season, you know? On top of
The one thing is, Tywin also brings up his father and basically just sort of the lessons that he's learned from, the people before him. And he's trying to pass down this legacy to his children, and they're sort of just squandering it in his eyes. Eyes. Yeah, and so Tyrion specifically is the imp and is not a proper person. I think he says in this scene, it's like by man's law, you are my son, but that's not really true.
Right.
Something like that.
I mean, let's break this scene down. Let's break the scene down because again, it's probably for me, it's the centerpiece of the entire episode. Which again, I loved reading this chapter because we're on the next book, right? We finished the Clash of Kings book 2. We're on book 3, A Storm of Swords, which famously makes up both this season and the next season, right? The next season is about the last third that's just kind of wrapping everything up that happens after the Red Wedding, but there's a lot that happens still as far as it's a big character moment book out of the books, and so this scene, right, we have Tyrion, he finally gets his meeting with Tywin and everything, and Tywin is Tyrion's trying to make small talk, Tywin is having none of it, right? And it basically kind of comes down to it with the fact that Tyrion is unsatisfied, he doesn't feel safe in King's Landing, he doesn't want to be in King's Landing anymore now that Tywin is there. He's like, I've served my purpose, I defended this city, I didn't get any gratitude for it. I got shunted off to this little cell. It's like, what do I want? I want Casterly Rock. I want to rule Casterly Rock. You don't need it. You're going to be here serving as hand of the king. It's my right as your only heir now that Jaime has joined the King's Guard and forbidden all heirs. I want what's coming to me. And Tywin straight up says, no, you're not worth it. Not in my eyes. And it's kind of fucked up. To say the least. This is really we always knew that Tywin had a lot of enmity for Tyrion, but I guess the reason why this comes as such a shock is because for the first 2 seasons where we saw the two of them together, it was kind of like Tywin begrudgingly offering Tyrion a position of power because he kind of had no choice, and Tyrion kind of being forced to accept it. But now we're kind of, for lack of a better word, back to the status quo, and now we see just Tywin's full feelings towards Tyrion unleashed, and they're not kind to say the least.
It's also, Tywin. If you watch later seasons and you get a little bit ahead of season 3, essentially he talks to Jaime and he tries to convince him to take up the lands and basically ignore the fact that he took that oath.
Right.
And
that's
it's one of those things
about oaths. Tywin does not care about oaths a lot. It's all about what services him.
Yeah, and Tywin has a full vision that Jaime's going to take over his lands and he's going to basically lead the family. And it's going to be by any means necessary. Tywin's going to make it happen. And part of that is the fact that they secured the crown. You can't really go against, Joffrey's rule. If, Joffrey allows Jaime to pick up the lands and rule, then who's going to stop them? And so I think Tywin has this vision of what needs to take place. I think it's one of those visions that stems from his father and probably grandfather, and this is the way it's going to be. This is how you rule a family, and Tyrion doesn't really fit into that mold. I think Tyrion is intelligent, and Tywin understands that, and he's only willing to use it when it serves him to his advantage.
Right. The Tywin's fatal flaw, right? We've talked a lot about characters' fatal flaw and how each and every one of the characters, despite the execution of it for certain of the characters in the later seasons, each and every character falls victim to their fatal flaw. And Tywin's fatal flaw is consistently putting it's ironic because it goes against it, right? It's a thing that he says to Tyrion in the finale, which is that the house that puts legacy and family first will forever outlast the family that puts the whims and wishes of their children ahead of them. And that's kind of Tywin's fatal flaw, is that Tywin at the end of the day sees his family, his children, as commodities. They are not people with their own individual kind of aims and wants and goals. They are merely there to serve and continue to prop up the legacy of the Lannisters. And this is kind of the real first instance that we get that, because before they constantly had to play second fiddle to Robert Baratheon, and then they were constantly in a position of trying to maintain and struggle their power. But now that they've kind of established themselves, it's kind of back to that status quo. And now that Tywin is back in King's Landing for the first time, and I think it's 30 years since he was serving as Aerys Targaryen's hand, he's going to start to see that that is not at all the case. Where Tyrion again tries to play ball but has wants and aims of his own. Cersei is not at all willing to play ball, because Tywin's got a lot of political games that he's attempting to play in order to continue to maintain the Lannisters' foothold, especially now that the Tyrells are in the city and attempting to play games of themselves. But Tywin especially brings up, oh, thanks, Chris. Thanks for tuning in, man. That means a lot. But Tywin, makes it clear here that again, because Tyrion does not kind of fit into his own worldview, that Tyrion will definitely get Tyrion will definitely get a suitable reward, as he says, but he will never inherit Casterly Rock, because in his mind, that is for Jaime, his golden boy. Even though Tyrion, in a lot of ways, I think this is even referenced by another Lannister cousin in the books, is much more so Tywin's son than Jaime is, But I think that's a nice segue into kind of the last segment that we explore in King's Landing, which is the enmity between the Tyrells and the Lannisters that starts here. I think it's much more established in the next episode when we meet Lady Olenna, who's revealed to be the true power behind the Tyrells. But it's a couple of very sparse scenes that we see throughout the second half of the episode, but I think they're amazingly well done, which is first we see Joffrey and Margaery.
Yeah, exactly. Margaery basically
literally going out and making herself like the people's champion here.
Yeah, she sees the hole in the marketplace, right? The people hate Joffrey.
Yes, they hate
him. And Margaery can make them love her.
If we're I easy in. Joffrey pissed everybody off last season. I can make them love me. And I love how, too, so she's in that scene with the orphanage, right? She has that big grandiose speech that she tells the orphans, your fathers were heroes, all that. They defended the city against people who wanted to conquer it. And afterwards, she's talking to the orphanage leader, and she's like, make sure that there's, stuff that's provided for them, and make sure that you come to me exclusively. And there's a little bit of a double meaning.
Yeah, well, exactly. She basically says, hey, I'll feed them, I'll help educate them, etc. And eventually her excuse is that she's done this type of thing in Highgarden before,
right?
So there,
at least that's what she tells them, right? And
naturally.
Yeah, she's naturally inclined towards the poor. But there's another thing, too, where she is endearing. And again, it's a very smart move early on. It's a very, very smart move as far as playing the long game, which is that she is endearing the people to her early on. She is kind of making them see,
but she's also saying things like, there's the beginning of the scene after they stop, there's a whole puddle of mud.
Yeah,
and
someone's literally just pouring shit out of the windows, and it's just dumps a puddle in front of her.
So her lady in waiting's like, you'll ruin your dress. And she just goes,
like,
it's
more.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, I got more. It's not a problem. And she's saying it loud enough so everybody can hear. So it's 100% a show on Margaery's end. Like you say, this is how the Tyrells play the Game of Thrones.
Right.
And the fact is, they try to out-charm and weasel their way into the love of the people. Right. And that's going to be their long game here because, listen, Joffrey is going to make way too many enemies, and, Margaery is hopefully going to be able to take the power of the throne.
And the other thing to keep in mind, too, is the fact that Joffrey's days are numbered, right? We're in season 3 now, so we're kind of past, kind of the heyday of Joffrey's rule. Joffrey's only got this season left where he doesn't really have as much to do as he did in the last season. And then he's got 2 episodes in the next season, and then he dies. And that's it. Then we kind of start to focus more on Ramsay.
That's the hindsight of seeing the show, that we know that his days are numbered. But
right.
If you haven't seen the show and you're going off of just what you see, you could definitely pick up on the whole idea that the people that fail to play the Game of Thrones, that aren't thinking about logistics,
they do not last long. They do not last long.
Yeah, strategize or whatever. Like when Margaery is sitting there, playing this game, and Joffrey's just sitting there twiddling his thumbs and doesn't really understand that she's
I love how too when she goes out to interact with the people, he's just sitting there in the car quivering, just kind of trading back and forth with his Kingsguard member. It's like, oh, should I go out there? Oh, maybe you should go. He does not want to go anywhere near these people.
Well, he doesn't know what to do because he can't understand what she's doing.
Right.
And I think that's the thing is he can't think 3 moves ahead.
Exactly. And
ultimately that is the fatal flaw of most characters that die in this show is that they really can't keep up with the pace of what's going on, what the interpersonal relationships are, what the sort of backroom deals are. It's like they just don't know what the game is.
And you see that. And the amazing thing too is you see how that's kind of wrapped up in the next scene where you see them sitting down and having dinner with Margaery and Loras and kind of them discussing the scene today. And Joffrey, of course, is just trying to play to Margaery's suitability and everything. He's trying to play the king, but Cersei immediately figures out what's going on, and Cersei is not having any of it. And it's very kind of subdued. It's all portrayed in the body language, but Cersei immediately senses that Margaery is a threat because that's the whole thing about Cersei. Cersei operates entirely from a sense of, okay, who is a threat to me? me and my immediate family, that being my kids, and that doesn't matter who it is. And she immediately senses, okay, Margaery is endearing herself to the people in a way that Joffrey and I have been unable to do since then. Hey, there's definitely a little bit of inherent jealousy there, but also not, because Cersei does not care about the people in a way that Margaery does, and she immediately, starts to smell like kind of a snake in the garden and understand, okay, the Tyrells, they may have saved us in this instance, but they are a threat going forward, and I think this is really interesting, especially since the Cersei-Margaery rivalry specifically is what drives and ultimately, causes a little bit of and is a big driving force for the events that happen in seasons 5 and 6, ultimately, kind of how that ends up wrapping itself up. But I love to see how that scene is so well established here, especially for characters that we really were only introduced to last season. Like, this episode handles a lot as far as like how tactful it is with its amount of storylines. But we only have like 2 other major storylines, but like I just wanted to do like a brief stop off in Harrenhal. What's it called? We see Robb's forces arrive. Like I love it. Again, it's only a brief scene, but we only need 5 seconds to see just how dissatisfied Robb's troops are with him. Like, they arrive at Harrenhal, they discover Gregor. Apparently, it's like right after a battle, he apparently sent some of his troops forward in order to try and take the ruin from Gregor Clegane. They arrive, the Cleganes, the Lannisters have deserted Harrenhal. They realize that like there's no mutual or tactical advantage to being there. They all arrive. Everyone is just dead. Everyone is just dead in the courtyard. They're kind of just walking around, seeing, viewing the dead. Roose Bolton and Rickard Karstark are kind of conversing. Rickard Karstark is clearly still pissed at Robb for the death of his sons and for, and for Catelyn letting the Kingslayer go. Robb immediately confines Catelyn to jail cell of some kind. We don't. The Starks don't spend too much time in Harrenhal, but it's
this scene is very interesting because Lord Bolton and Karstark are talking about their enemies and what they've done and seeking justice for this. But ultimately, by the end of the season, they side with the Lannisters and, Walter Frey, and they have this plan to basically usurp the Starks and become, Bolton's going to become the Warden of the North. So, in terms of what revenge are they going to be seeking, like when Bolton says, we need to, fight our enemies for this. Is this sort of the early seed that, he needs to kill Robb? Does he blame Robb for this? It's one of those things where, this is where the show should get a little more into the inner psychology of things, because if Karstark and Bolton are really upset at the massacre and they really want revenge against the Lannisters, for all the deaths here, the Red Wedding doesn't really make sense for them to do later on.
Right, so exactly.
So this scene is kind of weird for me because it doesn't really lean you towards that betrayal. It doesn't really, put the blame on Robb, so to speak, enough.
Right.
I think we need to see that for this scene.
Right.
To,
the whole
to
thing
really
about
make
this scene.
sense.
The whole thing about this scene and the purpose that it serves from my mind, again, is kind of showing the different sides, right? Again, we have 2 different sides, right? Bolton versus Karstark. Bolton, who is clearly a lot younger, a lot more ambitious, does not hold kind of nearly a lot of the same kind of ancient odes that a lot of the older northern families like the Starks, like the Karstarks, like the Umbers hold. Very clearly, his ambition and kind of his more ruthless nature was established early on, versus Karstark, somebody who does still hold those inherent northern values that Robb does, but who feels that he has been spited by Robb due to the fact that he feels that Robb has not done enough properly and because of the growing disillusion. And so I think what's established here, again, is kind of the enmity that ultimately spawns is the fact that Robb ultimately beheads Rickard Karstark for quote-unquote betrayal when Rickard Karstark kills several Lannister boys that they take prisoners as revenge for the Kingslayer, based on that slight. Meanwhile, Roose Bolton ends up portraying the ultimate sin when he realizes the tactical advantage of siding with the Lannisters, which will give him the power, which he seeks much more so than the retribution that can be gained from fighting the Lannisters consistently and losing, over Ned Stark's death, which again, everyone's kind of left that behind in the last season, right? That's a big thing about Robb's arc, is that kind of that slow decline that leads to the Red Wedding, which is where Robb is kind of on a downward spiral. Nobody really cares about avenging Ned's death anymore. Everyone is just kind of tired. Everyone wants to go home. Yeah, they're winning the battle, but they're not gaining any further ground in the war forward. And I think that kind of this scene, again, it's very, very quick. It's very small, but I think it's intrinsic to setting up like kind of the conflict that happens with Robb between these two families.
Also, the other seed that's planted, this is the final seed in this scene, is that the best hunters are chasing after Jaime Lannister.
Yes, right. We don't see Jaime in this episode at all, but we know obviously that.
But we now know that, Lord Bolton's men are chasing him down.
And Bolton makes a point to say that to Karstark out of Robb's earshot. Like, he makes it clear, it's like, okay, when we get Jaime, he's going to be an Ark control, not necessarily Stark control.
Yeah, so it's one of those things where I think it's very subtle, but it sets up some of the best scenes that take place with Jaime and Brienne that are going to happen this season.
Yes, absolutely. 2 more storylines that we got to hit before we wrap up this episode. We obviously, the after effects of the Blackwater Bay. I couldn't remember on my rewatch last season if this happened in this episode or the following episode, but it's this episode, right, where we catch up with Davos, who was revealed to have survived the battle in this episode, right? With the finale, we didn't know because the last we saw him was getting blown off the ship. But
that makeup is really good. It's
awesome.
Basically just like
his
burned
skin is peeling. He's clearly been stuck on that rock. But that's the thing that's established, is that he's been stuck on that rock for like a week or so. Like, it's been a while, like, with no food, like barely any water, but he finally sees a ship. He's waving to him crazily. And the other thing that I think that's really awesomely well established too is like kind of how it's built up and stretched out, where the ship arrives and they're like, oh, which king do you serve? And he's like, and he kind of hesitates there for a second because he's like, oh shit, if I say the wrong king, I'm screwed. But he sticks to his gun.
I think he decides, right? Exactly what you're about to say, that he is going to be true to who he is.
Right.
He's going to say that he is loyal to Stannis. And that's really, I think, the theme of Davos in this episode, because he's going to stick up for what he believes in. He's going to do what he has to do. And so after they rescue him and they arm, basically the merchants, it turns out the ones that Stannis had an alliance with. What was his name again? The head merchant?
Salador San?
Yeah, Salador. So it's Salador's men. And, Davos...
I would like to also correct you. You called him a merchant. He is a pirate, as he says. He is a pirate.
Pirate, merchant,
Tomato, I know.
It's similar, except for one kind of raids ships and potentially murders people. But hey, I think one of the things is they have a great conversation. Davos is like, come on, help me out here. Like, get me back to, Stannis. And basically Salvador is like, hell no, man. I gave you 30 ships. You promised me riches.
I got squat. Stannis lost. He's like, last I checked, did you check that battle? Stannis lost that battle. All of his ships are at the bottom of battle Blackwater Bay. And Eric, that is an excellent question, because last we checked, in the books, Salador San is still serving Stannis, like when he goes north to the wall. But you're right, after Davos recruits him in season 4, we never see him again. I will get to this later on, because I have a working theory that all of the big problems that I have with Game of Thrones as far as what happened in the last 2 seasons start in season 5, but we'll get to that at a later point. But the big takeaway
I think the answer is Salvador basically just sails off for his own spin-off that hasn't been created yet.
I would watch a spin-off about Salador San. That actor is what's it called? It's funny, I saw him again because there were a couple Game of Thrones actors that popped up in the His Dark Materials adaptation that came out on HBO. Also fantastic if you love that book series, where he plays the leader of the Egyptians. What's it called? Not Father Coram, the other one. Jon Fa, the leader of the Egyptians, Jon Fa, and he's fucking awesome at that. I was like, hey, Salador San and Lord Commander Mormont, they both left the show. One died, one didn't, and they came to the His Dark Materials universe. They crossed through the portal that was cut open by the Son of Life into the His Dark Materials universe.
Here's my pitch. It's called the Pirates of Westeros. We get Johnny Depp and team him up with Salador.
I'm down with that. You know what's funny? I wouldn't be surprised if that guy did pop up in Pirates of the Caribbean at some point. But the big takeaway from this scene is the fact that San tells him, is like, look, Stannis has closed himself off from everybody. He's not seeing anyone. He's not seeing his advisors. He's not even seeing his wife. He is only seeing the Red Woman, and they are burning prisoners. It definitely shows that, like, that kind of encounter that Stannis had with Melisandre at the end of the last season, it spooked him. He now kind of sees himself as like this vengeful messiah and everything. And Davos realizes, he's like, look, something's got to be done. Davos kind of puts his life into. I think that this season is probably the most important as far as Davos' season, because last season we were introduced to Davos, and he was just kind of like, he was Stannis' hand servant. He was kind of like Stannis' conscience, right? And now this season, I think, is the reinforcement of that, where he knows, he's like, okay, he is putting his life aside. He sees himself as no longer valuable. His son is gone, as his legacy is gone, and his whole thing is that, look, I have got to do what's right for my king at the end of the day. And he truly does believe in Stannis, and he believes that Melisandre is no good and will lead him down.
I think ultimately, when Melisandre is introduced, right, we have the older gentleman in Stannis' court that basically tries to poison her and ends up dying.
Mr. Crescent.
Exactly. So I think Davos, at first was like, hey, what the hell, you shouldn't really be doing this, and like he really goes with the flow, like Stannis is our king, we have to follow him. And I think the arc here is to really put him in the position that he's willing to do what it takes for his king, and he pulls a dagger on Melisandre, and that leads him into the prison cells.
Yes, indeed. And it sucks too, because it's like the way that Melisandre puts it, it's like, fuck, there was a reason why this woman has a hold over Stannis, because the way that she frames it, it is exactly the opposite of what Davos cautioned against it. Because remember, last season, Davos cautioned Stannis against bringing Melisandre to Blackwater, because then if Stannis wins the Blackwater, then it would be considered Melisandre's victory, not Stannis's, and that they wouldn't worship him or respect him as much. But it's completely backfired and gone in the opposite direction, where now Stannis has lost Blackwater in the worst way possible. And now Melisandre's managed to flip the switch on Davos by saying, oh, because of your suggestion to Stannis that I not come, now that's the reason why Stannis is lost. And you can tell Stannis is buying this hook, line, and sinker. And Davos,
it's
Davos
really weird.
It's really weird, but like
Stannis has these schoolyard children that are like, oh, he started it, you know. And it's like,
but it works. That's the thing. Like this shit worked back in the day. That's the thing, and that's
It's one of those things, like Stannis should be able to step above this. And, you know, again, looking at Stannis's career portfolio in this show, you know, he basically doesn't really think for himself. You know, someone tells him like, oh, hey, you know, put some leeches on this guy and you can make some wishes, you know, let's have a shadow baby. Let's, you know, what's that scene where he kills his daughter?
Oh,
you know, like,
yeah. What are you
much later on? Like
yeah.
Stannis basically is like, man. let's just
do whatever. It'll totally work.
Death magic for life, you know. So Stannis is
it doesn't work ever for him.
Yeah. So Stannis like can never put two and two together,
nope.
And I think it's always
it's always kind of to the detriment of other people, because innocence. Because for a man who claims to be like self-righteous and you know the one true king, it always feels like there are way more innocent people that are having to die and suffer because of his actions, and almost a lot of other people. Almost like I know Joffrey loved torturing his fair share of people, but like at the very least, like no one the only real instance of people that ever at the very least every death that he ordered, he knew that they were dying intentionally. There are so many people that unintentionally die because of Stannis' actions that he never originally intended to die. It's kind of insane, you know, as far as the blood magic. I think the only instance where the blood magic works for him is when he drops the leeches in the fire for all of his enemies, because all of those three kings that he names for the leeches do end up dying at some point throughout the show. But again, like not to the point where
when we get there, it's going to be like within a couple episodes of each other, two of them die, and then the third one dies like what in the next
couple seasons later, because you get Robb at the end of this season, then you get Joffrey literally only 3 episodes after, because Joffrey then dies in episode 2 of season 4. That's the thing. I'm gonna have a lot of fun covering that episode, because again, the Lion of the Rose is one of my favorite episodes, and I again reinforce the fact that Joffrey, for such an impact, goes out in episode 2 of that season, and then Balon Greyjoy doesn't die until 2 seasons later in the beginning of season 6. It's kind of funny as far as that goes.
You know, one of the things, like the whole leeches prophecy, that takes place, and 2 out of the 3 really happen right away.
Right.
And the third one happens much.
Well, and I'll tell you why that happens. It's because it's a fuck up. It's a continuity fuck up from the books, because they wait so long to bring in the other Greyjoy storyline. That happens a lot sooner in the books. Balon dies. The whole thing that happens is that Balon dies before Robb dies in the books. In A Storm of Swords, they get word that Balon has been murdered, and they don't know who did it, right? Because like I said, a lot of the stuff with the Greyjoys happens off book in A Storm of Swords. We don't see Asha at all. We don't see Theon while he's being tortured at all.
Yeah, this really needed to take place sooner,
earlier. Because the problem is, by the time they're brought back in, we're coming off an entire season with like no Greyjoys other than Theon. And so by the time they bring that back in, it's almost like, oh yeah, these were characters in the show.
Does Papa Greyjoy, he dies after Stannis, right?
After Stannis. That's the crazy thing. Yeah, Stannis dies first in the season finale, and then Balon Greyjoy dies in the first couple episodes of season 6 after Stannis dies.
So this little scene here with Davos has
for another 3 seasons after Stannis dies.
Sorry, it's led to a path where my mind is blown that this whole thing was not sorted out. I've always felt like Melisandre some of the things just didn't add up. And
Just wait. Like I said,
Yeah.
we're gonna put a pin in that because we got to wrap up this episode. But don't worry, we will get to that later on. Because there was a lot of shit that Melisandre does this whole season where I'm just like, what is happening? Like, what is the motivation here?
She's a very interesting character, and I like the mysterious kind of witch nature of things. But yeah, ultimately, the magic of the Lord of Light really doesn't make any sense.
It really doesn't make any sense at all. And before we get to Astapor with Daenerys, there's one other thing that I completely forgot about in King's Landing, which is an important, quick but crucial scene and pivotal scene, which is the scene where Littlefinger with Sansa, it's kind of a continuation of their whole thing from the previous season.
Right?
The
ship game.
And it's a really quick and brief but interesting moment where, again, Littlefinger is once again, it's the beginning of kind of Littlefinger and Sansa's little game that gets paid off. But there's a really interesting interaction that happens between Raz and Shay here, where Raz tells Shay, look after him. Raz is trying to relate to Shay. Shay's not having any of it, but Raz tells her, look after and protect her. And she's like, I always protect her. She's like, make sure you look after her with him. And because Raz knows is like, she knows better than to trust Littlefinger. And obviously, we know that it costs her life as time goes on. But it's a brief, quick little scene, but it's a fascinating one, and one that is going to pay off later on down the road. And Littlefinger says, he's like, I'm waiting to hear back on a potential assignment they may have for me, and when I leave, I may be able to get you out of here. Obviously referring to them wanting to use him in order to court Lysa Arryn and bring her back into the fold. But we wrap up Pat. We're back at the beginning of Daenerys' journey towards awesomeness, is what I call, right? After a season of her just being downtrodden upon and a season of her kind of just wavering around with nothing really to do, this is the beginning of Daenerys' journey towards badassdom. We cut in with her, really a fucking awesome intro shot, cutting across the waves from the viewpoint of the dragon. The dragons have grown exponentially, and they're now the size of kind of a little bit bigger than birds.
Listen, in the last season, we left the dragons. They were as big as my phone here.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like palm of the hand style stuff.
Now they can sit on her shoulder. They're big. They're getting bigger. And that's the whole thing that's established, is that dragons, when they eat consistently and are fed, they grow big quick. Yeah. But as you said, not quick enough.
These dragons are at this point bigger than people.
Yeah,
and
not quite. Oh, just about as big as people, but not quite bigger.
Well, hey, at least they're bigger than Tyrion, right? So, the main thing is, I will say that the dragons are growing. They're a little more powerful, and we haven't even gotten to the later storyline of the dragons sort of, learning to do their own thing without
and becoming more vicious, too.
So it's very interesting when she's like, "Oh, they're not growing fast enough." It's almost like, be careful what you wish for, because as soon as they grow bigger than this,
they start killing people randomly.
Yeah, they're not going to be as what you thought.
Right.
And I think that's one of the things. They really do show, Dany being naive here. It's like, only if the dragons were bigger, I could conquer the world right now.
And Jorah kind of reminds her, like, you gotta wait. Like they're gonna be, it's gonna be a couple of years. And that's why we're heading to Astapor, kind of establishing, they're using the jewels, the riches that they raided from the Karth vaults, and they're using it. They're gonna buy an army. They're like, screw it, we can't wait around anymore. We're old enough. We can't wait for the dragons to depend on them. There are people out there that still want to kill us. This is established. We need to start arming ourselves for this. And so Daenerys is finally in a place where she's got full agency on her own for the first time ever. She's dressed in a sleek blue dress that they got from Karth. She has positioned herself as a person of prominence. They are going to ultimately begin the thing, begin the quest in order to bring them back towards Westeros. And their first stop is Astapor, one of the 3 famous slave cities on Slaver's Bay. And this kind of begins her micro journey within dealing with slavery and kind of trying to free the world from some of the injustices that she faces. This is really where that arc is established based off of everything she experienced, both with the Dothraki in season 1 and in Karth in season 2, just trying to survive. And so they arrive in Astapor, and they meet one of the slavers who kind of, does this big, grandiose show, showing off all of the Unsullied and kind of what they're capable of. We're introduced to the Unsullied here, which famously, again, is an entire army comprised of eunuchs. But the whole thing about them is that they are trained from birth to have no fear of death and to be completely and utterly loyal to their masters, and with some pretty despicable and kind of really a mind-numbing training methods as well.
Well, the training is meant to kill a majority of them. I think they said a quarter of the people survive. and become unsullied. The rest sort of die. And the main thing is like to make sure that their humanity has been beaten out of them. Their final mission is to go into the marketplace and kill a baby in front of its mother.
Right.
And then the what was the thing? The slave owner.
Gives the mother a silver coin for the trouble. And even this is a little bit
but it's not the mother who gets the coin. It's
the owner of the child.
Yeah, the owner of the mother and owner of the child gets
right, because the mother again is a slave. It's setting up again just like kind of this really awful system. It's a little bit, I would say, over the top, but it's necessary in this instance in order to kind of emphasize just kind of the horrors and the brutality of slavery. And as far as like kind of underlines Daenerys' like righteous quest to like free the world that we obviously see how
Jorah's just like, let's just buy them.
Jorah's just kind of rolling with it.
Yeah,
like, Jorah is definitely still a little bit from the old, but we also know Jorah's got a history of like enslaving people. He had to flee from Westeros because Ned Stark wanted his head for, again, capturing poachers on his land and selling them into slavery. So like Jorah, I will say, it definitely puts a little bit more of a negative light on Jorah, where he's just kind of like, okay, this is kind of just the status quo. This is kind of just how things have been. We kind of just got to do our thing and move on.
The main thing is like he's willing to pay into the system, so he's going to perpetuate the system.
Right.
But he makes an argument that Dany's going to feed them better, is going to put them under better protection. Dany will be a
more just ruler. That's the thing.
Exactly. And so it sort of justifies the means. And I think he's just trying to get her to, purchase this army so they can get on with it.
Right.
And, I don't think she's going to rush into that decision lightly.
The biggest sort of sense of, I feel like, divide between Jorah and Daenerys that we see is that Jorah is constantly like, look, we got to keep moving. There are constantly people that are trying to come after us. We got to keep moving nonstop. And Daenerys, because she's still so young and so inexperienced relative to him, she kind of sees things in a very different way. Again, kind of like that generational divide where she is not yet used to all of the horrors of the world. Obviously, again, she had brutal conditions with the Dothraki, brutal conditions in Karth, but she is now in a position where she does not want to see this kind of suffering continue to happen to people. And this is, again, it kind of literally begins her conquest to quite literally liberate the slave leaders and literally spend an entire significant amount of time in this portion of the world so that she can learn how to rule and show the world that there is a position and a world that can exist without this type of slavery and this type of brutality and overlook. And I think it's a really interesting start how that's kind of all started here. And of course, the scene wraps up.
We visualize it, right? You know, the master's like, let me show you how desensitized the Unsullied are.
And it literally cuts off his nipple. And I'm just
which is crazy. It's basically unflinching. And once he's done cutting the nipple, he's like, men don't have a need for it. And he's like, oh, I'm all done with you. And the guy is like, yes, master,
And he kind of thanks him for it. He was just kind of like disgusted by it. We're also introduced to Missandei here. Obviously, it's so weird seeing Nathalie Emmanuel in that position. And now she's like kind of riding with Vin Diesel and Tyrese in the Fast and Furious movies. And I still remember seeing her here. And I'm just like, wow. What a long way. What an interesting career path that actress has had. But we're introduced to her here as well. Again, the kinship between her and Daenerys is not yet established, but like again, it's kind of established again. She is established as like she has no right. She is not a
master. At this point, the master is basically just like expletives all over the place.
Yeah, mocking everyone. Again, taking advantage of the fact that he thinks that Daenerys doesn't understand him. When it's established later on, Daenerys knows Valyrian. Like every Targaryen kind of inherently knows Valyrian.
Yeah. So it's one of those things where the master is very flippant and insulting to Daenerys. But obviously she knows what he's saying, and I think this is a great sort of scene that sets up the relationship between Missandei and Dany, because ultimately when it's revealed that she does know Valyrian, it's going to be one of those things where Missandei sort of rallies to her side.
Yes, indeed. And it's going to pay off in a big way in a couple of episodes. But the last shot that we have of this episode is her and Jorah walking on the dock. She sees this little girl that, she's trying to, appeal to her humanity. Dany, of course, goes for it, throws a ball to her. There's this shadow cloaked figure that's following them. She stops Daenerys from picking up the ball. Jorah thinks that he's the assassin.
Wait,
a very clever bait and switch here.
Dom, is the person in the cloak Luke Skywalker?
It might be. Hey, for all we know, it might be, But it's not. Of course, it's revealed to be a beta switch. The little girl is revealed to be a warlock. Again, the last we ever see of the warlock, it kind of almost drags the scene down because it's like, oh, man, I thought we were done with the dumb warlocks. I thought we left them behind in the last season, but they're still here just for that one brief moment before the little girl runs off the dock and jumps off, the person stabs the what is it, like a bug thing, a scorpion, I think it is?
I think it's a green scorpion. And it's I guess it's one of those fantasy moments where they're bringing out this cool creature,
right?
But like
and then
the
it immediately
basically
gets out.
For the rest of the series, it's like White Walkers, dragons and people,
and red priestesses.
Yeah, and this was like one of the only episodes where like another creature
sort of showed up. Oh well, we got a zombie polar bear. We did get a zombie polar bear, but yeah, that is the one thing I will say that definitely laggers is the like kind of the different like flora and fauna and different creatures. For the most part, it's just like it's just like regular creatures. Other than that, and
anyway, I think it's a great moment.
It is a great moment.
I really enjoy the docs and the introduction of
the reintroduction. We should say bringing back.
Exactly.
He's back after going out like a boss against Cersei. We didn't see him for all of last season, but he's back in this season. Barristan Selmy, portrayed once again by Ian McElhenney. He is back. He is here to serve Daenerys. He has had his time in Westeros. He is now here to serve what he believes. Again, he is here to honor the debt that he was unable to keep to the rest of her family when they lost the Trident, when he served Robert Baratheon. And Jorah kind of reminds her of that and throws it back in her face. But Barristan is here to say, this is another scene that is done completely different in the books, because for the majority of the books, Daenerys does not know the identity of Sir Barristan. He's kept completely... he keeps his identity completely a secret. He reveals himself as the squire of this former slave from the fighting pit, Strong Belwas, who is not featured in the show in any capacity, and is revealed and is only revealed at the last minute when he saves her life and reveals, obviously, Jorah's treachery against her. That whole break that happens completely differently in the books than it does here. But here, he establishes who he is. He states that he's here to serve her and everything, and that he is here to honor the debt that he failed to partake in protecting her father and her brother when they were executed. It's a moment for him.
Yeah, I definitely think, for the show, you have to streamline that storyline, make it clear who he is. Yeah. And it's also serves to show the audience that Dany is getting an upgrade. Like, she's basically on the verge of purchasing an army.
She is moving to the next level. She's got an army. She's got another advisor. She's about to get a brand spanking new set of kind of camaraderie that surrounds her. We got Grey Worm in a couple episodes. We got Dario in a couple episodes. We got Missandei in this episode. Like, her posse is building,
Yeah, it's like, I love it when a plan comes together. Right? This is going to be Dany's A-team.
He kind of even looks like Hannibal from the A-Team TV show, too. That works. So ultimately, that's how the show wraps up. It shows that certain characters are on the rise, certain characters are on the fall, but it shows that we are in for a long game as far as season 3 goes, but one that is going to come in with a powerful punch at the end. So good episode, honestly. I really like it. And one of the few episodes where nobody dies in this episode. I was trying to keep track, aside from
the fantasy scorpion thing.
Right, the white that Mormont burns at the beginning, because we don't see any of the Night's Watch deaths on screen, even though we see them happen in gruesome detail in the books, and the Green Scorpion. But no deaths in this episode. One of the few episodes with no deaths. But really good episode, really awesome start to season 3. I honestly think that out of the 3 premieres, I think this might be my favorite. Honestly, I really, really dug this episode, but.
Yeah, well, Tyrion's ambition does.
It does.
A little bit of not getting glass.
But it paves the way for such this interesting dynamics and build up, and it kind of reintroduces and reinforces all the stuff that we missed so much about, kind of that was really established in that first season that we didn't get to spend time to. We do because we just kind of had to spend so much time with Ned Stark and constantly reminding us that he had no idea what the fuck he was doing. But now we're really enmeshed in the game, and it is only getting more tense. So that was our review of the season 3 premiere, our 21st episode overall, Valar Dohaeris. What did you guys think? Whatever you thought, let us know in the comment section below. Be sure to click the like button, click the subscribe button, follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Talkin TV Podcast if you aren't already. Pat, where can the good people find you on the interwebs?
Listen, I'm just talking about this Thrones stuff right here on the Talkin TV channel. So check it out there. And I keep promising, at some point I'll fire up Instagram and I'll post something.
Hey man, we're gonna hold you up. By the time this series is done, you will have posted something on there.
Yeah, and you could look it up at Patrick W. Hero. Eventually you'll see something other than the things I've posted in the past.
And of course, you can follow me on Facebook and Instagram at Movie Nerd Reviews. Again, we've got our Prisoners of the Ghostland review going up tomorrow. That was, oh man, Pat, if you want just an insane Nicolas Cage movie to watch, watch that movie 100%. It was a lot of fun.
Aren't they all crazy?
Well, no, but this one
point?
especially. At this point, yes, but that one especially. Yeah, so you guys can check that review out tomorrow. We've got our Halloween Resurrection, the next installment of our Halloween first time watch going up next week. I love Eric's comment too that he brought up at the end where he's like, it's always jarring when no one dies in a Game of Thrones episode. But yeah, that's true. We got one. And we will see you guys next week for episode 2, Dark Wings, Dark Words. We're only getting started. The Battle of the Throne is continuing. And we'll see you. And of course, we're only getting into October where we're going to have a bunch of stuff, a bunch of great reviews coming your guys' way. All that and more. 12 seasons in a short film, and watch more fucking movies. We'll see you guys next
more
week.
pay raises for Bronn.
Yes, indeed. More pay raises for Bronn. We'll see you guys next time.